If you're someone that's struggled with depression for a long time, or perhaps you have issues with anxiety or panic attacks, you've likely wondered if you can ever get better. Have you started to lose hope? If you're struggling with neurodegenerative health, if you've heard of your loved ones, your family or friends suffering with Alzheimer's or dementia, perhaps you're feeling like these are life sentences. Once they happen, or if you have a genetic predisposition, then it's a life sentence. Things can never get better. Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, macular degeneration, just to name a few, are some of the most debilitating neurological, neurodegenerative brain conditions that we face today. But let me tell you, if you've started to lose hope, or you feel like maybe this is just the way life is and that change is not possible, I want to show you that there is another way. In this series, we want to bring you amazing information about how you can build a better future. We want to reinstill that hope that you have lost, that belief that things can get better. Too often, we're told that this is simply a hormonal imbalance and that we're just genetically predispositioned toward a particular mental health problem. However, science is discovering that while genetics certainly play a role in all this, we are not doomed by our genetics. The environment we live in and the choices we make can alter our genetic expression. This is called epigenetics. So, if you've been told that you were born with an imbalance and you may have to be on medication for the rest of your life because of your depression or anxiety, do not give up. Medications can have profound and life-altering side effects, and yet many people are told that these are the only options for these conditions. You'll see cases of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, macular degeneration, and other neurodegenerative health conditions be reversed. You'll see the case studies, the science, and the real-life case studies of the people so you can see the real-life proof. You'll see that the protocols and approaches we're taking to depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses is the same as the approach that we're taking for neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's. Isn't that fascinating? See for yourself so you can actually work out the best protocols, the best diet, the best lifestyle practices. These things will not only protect your mind from depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses, but they'll also protect your mind against neurodegenerative diseases. We're here to protect your brain and help you put conditions into remission and prevent these things from happening. I look forward to seeing what you learn and what you apply through this amazing series.
At one point, I had struggled with alcohol abuse throughout my life, and so I'd been sober for about 6 years, and I ended up going back to the bottle, and I drank a bottle of tequila one night on my own, and I took a gun, and I didn't want to make a mess, so I went outside in my backyard, and I pulled the trigger, and the gun jammed. There was no reason that the gun should have not gone off.
And it had a bullet in it?
It had, I think I'd loaded it with 4. So yes.
And the bullet was?
It was chambered, yeah. It was ready to fire. I had a friend check the gun after I'd fired it, and he knows a lot about guns, and he said there's no reason that it should have not gone off. At that point, I wasn't thinking very clearly because of the alcohol, and so I made a phone call to my father, and so he came and actually spent the night with me at my house and then took me to a psych facility. So I didn't have any other plans beyond that at that point. I just knew since it wasn't effective that I was needing help at that point.
Well, Christy was a complex case. She had come in on a lot of medications, including one of the most difficult medicines to get off of, which is a benzodiazepine, lorazepam, and then clonazepam. On top of it, she was on antidepressants, she was on sleep medicines, she was on Adderall to try to be able to get some focus, which is what we give for ADHD. She was on gabapentin, and she had been on SSRIs until shortly before she came. And on top of it, she had several addictions. She was major into tobacco, caffeine. She was an alcoholic as well, although she had quit drinking recently. And that was just that side of things. In addition, we found out that she had some genetic issues. She had some premenstrual dysphoria that was caused by a metal metabolism issue that she did not know that she had, and this apparently was passed along through her mother, who also has the same type of symptoms. So her depression would get worse before her periods. And that's something that we can correct with the right doses of zinc and B6 to help her to be able to handle her copper better. In addition, she had major sleep issues with a circadian rhythm hit. She had the developmental issues. In addition, her diet was not best, so she wasn't making enough serotonin or dopamine in regards to her diet. She had social issues with her recent divorce, and she also had some frontal lobe issues, plus her lack of focus. So, with all of those issues, it's not at all surprising that she had severe depression, and she was trying to cope with it in the worst possible way by ending her life, which she tried 5 times to do before coming to this program. Fortunately, although it took longer because of her high amounts of benzos that she'd been on, she responded well. Each one of those problems that I listed can actually improve, and the causes of those can be eradicated, and that means depression and anxiety itself can be eradicated. And that's exactly what happened to her.
It's great to be able to give people meaningful information, because knowledge is empowering. And if we have knowledge, then we can change things. We can change the outcome. For so many years, medical science wanted us to think that everything was genetic and predetermined, and if we were going to change anything, we had to have a drug. Now we know that most of it is environmental. It's situational, it's not genetic, and if there are genes, we can work around those genes. It's called epigenetics. We can do things to influence and change them. And so for instance, cancer, way down in the single digits, the genetic causes of cancer, so 3 or 4%, which means the other,
in all cases.
Yeah, which means the other 95% are environmental, which means we can change them. And so as we learn more about genetics and how little, what the truly small role it plays, and that's not completely true for Alzheimer's, but we can change it. It's called epigenetics. We can change the outcome by modifying what we do in our environment. So epigenetics is very, very important in Alzheimer's, degenerative disease, neurocognitive disorders, all of these situations, very important.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that news. That's something that I've believed, and otherwise I wouldn't bother doing this. I would just give up like not everybody else, but a lot of people have just given up.
Just give me a pill, Doc.
Depression is often caused by ruminating on past events. By living in the past, we often feel that we don't connect with those in the present. We feel different or distant from all those around us, and even when loved ones do express care for us, it often just feels that they cannot understand. And so we hold back from sharing this deep struggle with them. This causes further isolation, which amplifies the feeling that no one can ever understand or really care about us. It is a very vicious cycle, and the longer we stay stuck in it, the deeper we end up traveling into depressive thoughts. In a way, it's like being stuck in a whirlpool that is sucking you down, and you are able to get to the surface and get some air once in a while, but just enough to stay alive. But then you're in a constant struggle to not be sucked down to the bottom. Anxiety, on the other hand, is when we're focusing on the future and trying to determine the outcome. Because our minds have limited information, we tend to fill in the gaps. If we've had failures or bad experiences in the past, our mind will fill in the gaps with what it knows. If those gaps get filled in with ideas of failure, then it creates an overwhelming fight or flight reflex. This is when we feel the cortisol kick in and the feeling of anxiety rushes over us. If this fight or flight reaction escalates too much, it can develop into a full-blown panic attack and we feel that we're going to die and there's no way out. The reality is, when there is a threat in real life, like being chased by a dog, for example, we have something physical to react to. We can run away, we can fight. But when it's triggered by the thoughts in our minds, where can we go? How can we fight? So we can feel stuck. We can't quite pinpoint where our fear is coming from, and it makes it very difficult to diffuse the situation if we don't understand what is happening.
In recent years, there's been an explosion of mental illness in our society and culture, and we can see that mental illness is really on the rise. For example, among young people, back around World War II, you had studies that were done to assess how many mental health problems people had. Well, now, here recently, they did follow-up studies and they found that there's actually been a 500% increase, meaning 5 times more diagnosable mental health problems among young people, meaning in high school and college. So that's just one example, but to give you some more general statistics, about a quarter of the United States adult population deals with mental health problems every year, like a diagnosable mental health problem, and about 20%, give or take, is on some kind of psychiatric medication. And by and large, that's antidepressant medication, but in recent years there's also been a lot of antipsychotics, and of course those medications come with big risks associated, and so mental health in America is not getting any better.
So what is depression? I mean, what we have here is we have 350 million people right now have been diagnosed with depression, 1 million of which have been known and will commit suicide this year. Depression is predicted to be the #1 cause of disability through 2030. It is a global epidemic. It's a public health crisis. And so many people are on antidepressants and they're not getting better. If we weren't at the epidemic, just think 350 million people. That's as many people as America. Just the whole country of America is depressed, the globe. And if that doesn't raise a red flag that what we're doing is incorrect, the diagnosis, the treatment, the whole experience as a patient, I don't know what else can say because it's only getting worse. You know, what works for you is different than what works for me. So you have to find the solution for you. But here's depression symptoms. Feelings of guilt, and just think about how common these things are. Feelings of guilt, sadness, worthlessness, desperation, inability to experience pleasure, changes in appetite and sleep patterns. Like, who doesn't experience that? Lack of energy? A lot of us are chronically fatigued. We sit down all day, right? We're not exercising. Poor concentration, brain fog, poor memory, motor retardation, fatigue. Well, you go to a psychologist, you're going to be diagnosed with depression. And here's something that is a key: reoccurrent suicidal or death ideation. Why is that a depression symptom? Why isn't that something else? To me, they're lumping your desire to die. It has been now linked to depression versus a whole nother serious matter like suicide ideation. I say that because we're lumping, it's a lump, it's a catch-all disease. And not to say it doesn't exist, because I was, quote, clinically depressed. I know what it's like to be despair. I know what it's like lacking energy and having brain fog and what all the other things, right? Changes in appetite. I experienced all this stuff. But to label me as depressed, then to get me on an antidepressant isn't the solution. Okay? And I want people to realize that all of these are just symptoms that change. And in 10 years, it could be a whole new litany of symptoms. The one thing that really concerns me out of all this is the desire to die. And that, to me, isn't a sign of depression. That's a sign that you're desiring to die. That's a whole nother issue altogether that shouldn't be taken lightly. If someone really desires to die for 2 weeks, they should be in care. They need to be under some sort of home care support where they're not going to be alone for 24 hours at a time. These people need to be loved on. There needs to be a system. But to say, hey, here's an SSRI, or here's a drug, or here's a supplement, go for it and it'll heal your depression, that's a disservice to humanity.
Okay, so this is an interesting sort of answer as far as how medications impact mental health. And the first thing to understand is that medications never heal illness. And that doesn't mean I never use medications. I do believe they have their place, but ideally in the short term use. And the reason for that is because what they do is that they help to suppress symptoms, but then the brain actually pushes back. In other words, if you give somebody a prescription for anxiety, for example, like Xanax or Valium, well, it helps to decrease the amount of neuronal activity in the brain. So that slows everything down, it makes you feel calmer. But then what the brain does is it pushes back. And essentially, it actually upregulates the amount of excitability in the brain to counterbalance that. So pretty soon, if you're not dealing with the underlying issue, you end up with actually just as much anxiety, but now you're on a medication that you're tolerant and dependent on. And so then over time, what happens is your symptoms actually get worse and worse, but now you have the medication plus you have the side effects of medication. So what they're seeing is that, for example, with anxiety medications that can create long-term chronic anxiety, with antidepressant medications that can create long-term chronic refractory depression. With antipsychotic medications, it actually makes the brain super sensitive to dopamine, which means that they're going to tend to actually have more chronic episodes of psychosis. And not only that, it actually makes people, both antipsychotics and antidepressants, it actually makes them apathetic. So meaning they don't really care about things anymore. And it makes them have problems with mental processing, like memory and that sort of thing. It also starts impairing frontal lobe function, which is important for logic and self-control and that sort of thing. And so what I deal with a lot, and I talk with patients when they're on these medications long term, first of all, it's very difficult for them to get off. And secondly, they actually start missing out on the joy of life. And they start saying they say things like, you know, I'm not really even in touch with who I am anymore or my feelings. And yes, I'm not depressed, but I'm also not happy, and I'm not really fulfilled. And so you can start to understand how these medications, even though they might help the symptoms short term, in the long term can actually cause more harm.
You know, the challenge is that a lot of people will, when they go to the doctor with anxiety or depression, they're recommended an antidepressant, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is designed to help you reuptake serotonin, to get more mileage out of it, make it more efficient. The problem is it's analogous to using a gasoline additive in an empty gasoline tank. So in the South, we say, you know, if you don't have any gasoline in the gasoline tank and you're using a gasoline additive, it ain't going to work. It just doesn't work. It doesn't, you know, there's no benefit from using a gasoline additive in an empty gasoline tank. And those with anxiety and depression that, you know, we see with fibromyalgia, they've depleted that brain chemical serotonin over the years. Poor sleep, the stress that they've been under, maybe taking prescription medications that have created more problems, poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, because, you know, maybe they really can't do a whole lot because of the pain. But most patients are going to be prescribed a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor like Prozac or Celexa, Zoloft. And you know, Jonathan, the problem with those is those antidepressants don't make serotonin. They're only designed to help you hang on to serotonin. But again, if you're trying to use something to help you hang on to serotonin and there's nothing there, it's probably not going to do anything. And this is the reason why we know that when you look at a meta-analysis of studies, 70% of the time, an antidepressant is no better than a sugar pill, no better than a placebo. And so oftentimes what happens is patients will go on these medications and it will work for a period of time, but then eventually it quits working. And a big part of that is this thing called downregulation, which the brain receptor, these receptor sites in the brain for these medications, eventually they start to shrivel up and disappear. And you can lose up to 40 to 60% of these receptor sites. So eventually the medications have nowhere, you know, like a docking station, to dock onto, and they just quit working. And then patients will go from maybe taking Paxil and gaining 40 to 60 pounds, which happens on that medication, to maybe taking Lexapro. But again, no one has an antidepressant deficiency.
When it comes to depression and anxiety, there are a few different types of medications that are often prescribed by doctors. The most common are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which includes the well-known brand names Prozac, Lexapro, Zoloft, and Paxil. Another fairly common type of medication is selective serotonin norepinephrine inhibitors, SNRIs, which include brand names like Cymbalta and Effexor. There are other types that are less commonly used, like NASSAs and MAOIs. Other anti-anxiety drugs include benzodiazepines. This includes Xanax, Valium, and Ativan. People on these medications often develop a drug tolerance and therefore have to increase their dosages, which creates a situation ripe for addiction. In fact, benzos themselves can actually cause depression as a side effect. So, what are some of the side effects of depression and anxiety medications? Common problems can range from nausea and dizziness to insomnia and sexual problems. Considering insomnia and lack of sleep is a causative factor in depression, how can it not be seen as inhibitive of recovery to take a drug that limits your ability to get good quality sleep? Sexual problems often include reduced sexual desire and reduced sensitivity. Some people, especially children and young adults, are more prone to experience suicidal thoughts while taking SSRIs. Isn't this the very thing that we're seeking to prevent? We're talking about taking people who are struggling with painful or anxious mental states and adding to that with these destabilizing side effects. Social norms, media, and the medical industry communicate to us that taking a prescription medication is a normal and everyday occurrence, as if we had all been doing this for centuries and it's just a part of life. However, it's not. The intense side effects of some medications are incredibly harmful and sometimes irreversible. So, are medications the only solutions when dealing with depression and anxiety? Is talk therapy the only solution? Is there more a person can do for their mental well-being?
One of the big problems with any psychiatric medication is that they all have the possibility of causing 100 different possible side effects. And in the case of benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium, one of the most dangerous things in my mind is that they can make people often very impulsive. And so sometimes they can make people make decisions that they normally wouldn't make. And the reason for that is because they affect the frontal lobe of the brain. So they might make people make poor driving decisions, for example, and get in a car accident. Or they might make people make very poor relationship decisions. Things like medications like Prozac and other antidepressants, one of the big warnings that they have there is that it can actually increase suicidal thoughts and sometimes actions. There have been people that when they start these medications actually do things to harm themselves or other people too. So these medications are not benign, and we have to be very careful in understanding that they can be, they're potent drugs, and if they're not used correctly, they can do more harm than good. There have been cases where people actually have done things that are completely out of character for them because their brain was altered with medication. You know, where because they lose that fear of consequences, that they might do something very violent to somebody or even to themselves. And so it's something that we have to be aware of.
When the phone gets called to emergency or to police, or and there's been a violent act in this household, or I've done something violent, the first question that gets asked is,
are you on any medications, or are they on any medications?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which type of medications are they talking about?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Well, I would guess that most of the time they're concerned about benzodiazepines, because in my experience, those ones have the biggest effect on the frontal lobe, especially if those are combined with alcohol. It's a very lethal combination in a lot of ways. One of the scary things is too, nowadays you have the opioid epidemic and people dying from opiates, and the combination of opiates with benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium, that's what can often be very lethal, even putting people to sleep at night. You know, they'll just fall asleep in there and never wake up.
I do my very best in order to share this information with thousands of people, but thousands of people which I have reached is only a drop in the bucket. It's not 1 million people that I reached when I would do a national TV show on relationships and sell millions of books. You cannot say these things on national TV. These things do not go into the media because the media gets its money from the drug companies. 70–80% of the money comes from advertising, money comes from the pharmaceutical industry, and the natural foods industry, the natural supplement industry is their competitor. And they don't want to be put out of business. And so what happens is that the kind of insights that you're sharing with people, the doctors you're interviewing, the researchers you interview, this information doesn't go mainstream because mainstream doesn't get paid by this industry. They're paid by the pharmaceutical industry. So without the work you're doing, people cannot hear this. And I've watched some of your other documentaries, and I watched them. I bought the product. I didn't even watch the product. I see it once, I got it. I took my notes. But I bought it just to support you and the work that you're doing, because this is the most important work. We have a health crisis. And the crisis is not, gee, we don't have money for drugs and medical treatments are so expensive and we need everybody to have more insurance to cover the drugs and the things that are making them sicker and sicker and sicker. The medical crisis has nothing to do with the cost of drugs and hospitals and insurance. The medical crisis is the lack of knowledge of how people can be healthy. Doctors are not taught to teach people to be healthy. They're not authorities on health. They're the opposite. They're authorities on sickness and disease and how to take away symptoms in emergency situations, which will have downstream side effects.
Well, you know, what happened was back in the 1950s, clinically, people stumbled upon the fact that some of these drugs they were using, for example, for nausea, that they would also have an effect of decreasing psychotic symptoms in some of the patients. And so they said, oh, okay, well, these drugs actually help to block dopamine, so maybe that's why people get psychotic. And so then they started coming up with these dopamine blocking drugs, and then that's when Thorazine came on the market, and you had this tidal wave of Thorazine being prescribed. And then shortly around that time, you also started having different medications like Elavil and some of these other antidepressants come on the market with the idea that, okay, norepinephrine and dopamine, if we just get the right balance of these, then people's depression, anxiety is going to get better. And then after a while, they figured, well, it's not getting as good as we'd like, but then serotonin, maybe serotonin is what actually is doing it. So then that's when Prozac came on the scene, and then you had the Prozac revolution. So all of these drugs were part of what we call the monoamine hypothesis, meaning monoamines are actually those chemical messengers in the brain that nerve cells send to each other to communicate. And what researchers were thinking is that, okay, if we just get the right balance of those in the brain, that's actually what is going to help improve people's mood state or decrease their psychotic symptoms or whatever. But the truth of the matter is that the story is much more complex than that. And it's not just how much serotonin is available in the brain, how much norepinephrine, dopamine, but it's also the levels that are available throughout neural networks. And so it's a lot more related to the way that the nerve cells interact with each other through the whole brain, not just the levels of these neurotransmitters. And so, you know, what started happening in the 50s and 60s is that you started to go from this psychosocial approach in mental health care to a more medical or medication approach. And this was a wonderful opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry to say, aha, now we finally have drugs to actually treat mental illness. This was where the National Institute of Mental Health started funneling all of their resources, instead of trying to explore more holistic approaches to actually treating mental health, to finding drugs to cure mental health disorders. And that was driven, I think, largely by trying to make profit on treating people's mental illness. And of course, that did two things. Number one, it really didn't solve the underlying issue with mental disorders, but it also, number two, it kept us from continuing to find things that would actually be effective. So I think what happened is that it's really made us at least 40 years behind right now where we should be in mental health care, because we have lost a lot of wonderful time that we could have spent really looking for things to address the underlying causes of mental illness instead of just masking symptoms, which is all that medications really do. Well, you know, in my career, my goal is to really help people to discover what the underlying issues are that are triggering their mental illness, so that if they can figure those out and address those, then they can actually get well instead of just masking symptoms through medication management. And to me, that's really rewarding, because then people become free instead of feeling like they're ball and chain to medication for the rest of their life. And look, I'm not against medication. I mean, I use it every day, but it is a tool, and we should be using it, I think, as a bridge to helping people move, address those underlying issues and then get well, instead of just saying, well, this is the rest of your life on medication.
So what I've found over the years in my personal experience as well, this is how the whole thing started, is nutritional deficiencies. Those are really, for me, the cornerstone. You've got to get that right. And if you don't, you're really going to be challenged to ever overcome any kind of mood disorder. We really are what we eat. More importantly, we are what we digest. We know that no one has a Prozac deficiency.
Yeah.
And, but you might have an amino acid deficiency. Amino acids are the building blocks combined with B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin C. That's what makes these neurotransmitters, these brain chemicals, these hormones that allow us to be happy, to help us control our moods, to help us digest our food, regulate our pain cycle, regulate our sleep-wake cycle. Super, super part of this whole thing.
Awesome. So why do you think people are deficient? Because a lot of people, and especially a lot of people with depression and anxiety, they're eating healthy according to what they know. It's not like they're trying to eat bad. A lot of them are trying to eat really well.
Yeah.
How could it be so simple that it's a deficiency?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's simple, and I think there's different causes, different triggers for different people, and that really creates the big challenge for most doctors, because where do you start? And with fibro in particular, when they present themselves with 30 symptoms, sometimes doctors will look at them and dismiss them as being a hypochondriac, which nobody wants to fake this, right? So nothing can be further from the truth. But with anxiety and depression, there's different things that can come along that can cause depletion in these certain chemicals. Low thyroid, leaky gut, food allergies. There's a big long list of things that can cause deficiencies no matter how well you're trying to eat. If you're not careful, it can sabotage you.
Are all depleted when you eat sugar. So once again, we come up against high blood sugar. Our blood sugar spikes. Anything that makes us feel really good, anything that makes us feel that big dopamine rush, that big excitement, you just lost minerals. Okay, that's why women, when they get married, it's like this big, huge thing, and they get depressed afterwards. It's like, well, I married this guy. What happened? And men, when men don't necessarily get depressed. They just get passive. They don't have the same juice that they had before. It's they just ran out of minerals. This big positive thing happens. People crash. What is the crash? It's mineral deficiency.
And I like to use this analogy that we're all born with a stress coping savings account. And in that stress coping savings account, we have certain chemicals that allow us to deal with stress. We have serotonin and dopamine and cortisol and DHEA. We have vitamins and minerals. We have pantothenic acid. And these chemicals allow us then to be able to handle stress. And the more stress that we get under, the more likely we are to use these chemicals. And if we're not careful, we can bankrupt them. Those with fibromyalgia and even those with anxiety and depression, somewhere over this period of time of these stressors, And it could be chronic stress, a challenging job, it could be a challenging, marriage, it could be a surgery, an illness, these different things that come along. Again, the straw that breaks the camel's back. But when that happens, they bankrupt these chemicals. And then stress becomes so magnified that then they're kind of like the canary in the mind. Anything can set them off.
If you've got someone that only prescribes drugs, they aren't going to be thinking about minerals or parasites or gut biome. And those are critical because we are a whole. The brain does not exist in isolation. And we're learning more and more of this, and we will see mainstream medicine adapt these to some degree, more or less sooner or later, because it's just undeniable at this point in time. But the head in the sand approach is hard to get over and hard to change. They've been taught to believe that a drug will fix whatever, and that's the only solution. They've been taught to disrespect herbs and nutritionals and all of these other paradigms. So you've got to, first of all, do it yourself, a lot of study, a lot of homework, or go to a practitioner who is open to these possibilities.
I'm here with Dr. Elena Villanueva, and we are here in some patient records, and we're discovering what it's all about. What is it that people are deficient in that makes them unhappy? What is it that people need in order to send off those happy signals, to create a great mood, and to have someone to be able to experience the dynamics of life as well? We're not trying to make people perpetually happy. We're trying to make things operate normally so they're happy when they ought to be happy, and rather than, if some of these levels are off, they could win the lottery or have the most beautiful day with their family and feel like empty, right? And that's what's the problem with these numbers being off.
Absolutely. We're not trying to force a change. We are working on optimizing the body's systemic engines so that the body can function normally. If the body's engines are functioning optimally, then your brain chemistry is going to function optimally. And then you can experience everything that life has to offer. You're right. I mean, we all have good days, we all have bad days, but we need to be able to process things in a normal, healthy way.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Our brains are designed, and our bodies, we're designed to be resilient. So like, we can get hit off our horse with some really bad news, but that's also not designed to like lead us to want to jump off a building. It's all about being able to respond to that challenge of life in a way that is constructive and moving in the right direction. And a lot of people are just are shooting at life. I mean, like this guy or gal, that their levels are just too low. So you give somebody like that a challenge, a really big life challenge, they really don't have the tools. It's like going into an army with a war with a slingshot, right? It's just like, you're not going to win. It's
so true. What happens is that when the brain chemistry is off, because of whatever the underlying cause is, when the brain chemistry is off, the perception of the world around them is skewed to the point where when they have something bad that happens, it completely derails them. Or maybe something that wouldn't be bad or derail anybody else suddenly derails the person, and it's because the brain chemistry is off, because the person has systemic engines that are not working properly.
Beautiful, and that's a really, really empathetic piece for those of you that are strong people, quote unquote, people that are always on top of things, and maybe you have been for a lot of your life, and now you can't work out why things are just falling apart, and why things that you normally used to be able to deal with, you're just not coping with them right now. And don't beat yourself up. Don't feel like you just need to muscle it up. Ask for help, get help, find the answers. Let's get some answers here today.
Yeah, let's take a look at this.
So I'm looking here at these, let's give this guy a name, because we're being thoughtful to this person.
Let's call him Jeff.
Jeff, okay, so Jeff here is, but this is a real person that has been to Dr. Villanueva, and he has come in, and this is his first test. Is that right?
Yes, this is his first test. So this is, we're calling him Jeff, and he's 46 years old, and he came in, let's take a look at this. He came in October of last year.
Yep.
And he was really, really struggling with a lot of anxiety. He was having sleep issues. He was having gut issues. And he was definitely having some depression. He had developed also some increased food sensitivities and such. And very, very well educated,
Yep.
works in the corporate world.
Right.
The guy's got it together, or
Yeah.
at least everyone thinks he's got it together.
You know what that's like?
But we totally know what that's like. But on the inside, the guy is feeling horrible. So he comes to us, and we ordered labs on him so that we could start looking for what's out of balance and what's not working. And the test that I wanted to share with you today, I didn't bring every lab that we did on him, but I brought the brain chemistry one because so many people don't know that there is even such a thing as brain chemistry testing. So I think this is really valuable for people to get to see this.
I love that. Thank you. So let's go through each one of these. So serotonin is in the low here. And
by the way, he had been on SSRIs, so he had been on prescription medication to help increase his serotonin levels. But as we could see here, his serotonin levels were still very low.
So that attempt to artificially prop up serotonin for him didn't work, and it may have for a time. Like, it's possible.
It's very possible
that this could have been in the normal range for the first 6 months, a year, 2 years. But how long had he been on that medication? Any remembrance?
He had been on and off medications, I think, for about 15 years.
Yeah.
But
it makes sense that over time that things start like not working anymore. But
True.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing.
But this is what he told me. Even with the medications, he never really got relief. And we can look here at the test and we can see why. Even if the medication had brought up his serotonin levels, almost all of his other neurotransmitters, with the exception of this one and this one, they were all way too low. He didn't have enough of his other neurotransmitters that also help him to not feel anxious and depressed and tired. So, as you can see here, he had, for example, he had low dopamine. We can see that all of these are low, but we'll just touch on the low dopamine here. With low dopamine, he's also going to have anxiety, and he's going to have depression, and he's going to have anxiety to the point of having impulsivity even.
Mm-hmm. Which is
like he may feel so anxious sometimes that he just wants to put a backpack on and run.
Yeah.
Because he's not feeling well. Everyone will exhibit impulsivity differently.
Yeah.
So, there are some patients who get angry. Like, I had a teenage boy whose neurotransmitters were off. He was having this excessive impulsivity that was combined with a fight or flight response because of the combination of his neurotransmitters. So he was in fight or flight all the time. And when he was on the football team and the kids would tackle him during practice, he would have a very impulsive fight or flight response, and he would go off on these other kids and just start tackling the hell out of them. He was hurting the other kids, and then he would feel so bad about his response that he would run off to the sidelines and he would start vomiting. Because he was just feeling horrible, but he couldn't help himself. So he was beating up on these other kids when he would get tackled because it was an impulsive response, because the brain chemistry was off.
Wow.
And this is a really good kid. Like, we've worked with him. So this particular kid that I'm talking about, he no longer has this issue. He's back on the football team.
Wow.
He's not hurting the other kids, and he's not vomiting out on the sidelines anymore. But this is an example.
For him, the whole experience.
The whole experience was, but this guy, he's 46, so he's able to control his impulsive,
Got it.
the impulsivity that he has, he's able to control that better.
And but this other kid, so we can finish the story on the kid, because I'm really interested. Do you say all these levels are off dopamine? What was the... And then he resolved it through some of the things we're about to share? Is that...
Absolutely,
Right.
Absolutely. The same processes. It's the
Right.
same process, no matter what's going on, we're looking for the root causes. So with this 46-year-old that we're calling Jeff, he was feeling a lot of anxiety. He was feeling depressed. He was having issues sleeping. He was having increased food sensitivities. And this is what we saw. We went forth and we addressed all of the imbalances that we found in his body. We worked on anti-parasitic protocols. We worked on putting him on an anti-inflammatory, vegan-based diet, and we did gut repair with him. So we addressed it all from a very foundational nutritional level to remove the interferences that were not allowing his own body to make his own brain chemistry. And this is a process that this particular patient, this particular client, has been with me for many, many months, and he was one who actually took it. It was a little slower process with him because he had developed so many food and chemical sensitivities that when we went to put him on a protocol to add supplements, we could only add one at a time, 1 month at a time. So it took him a much longer time to see the results. But
why did it take so long to put the supplements in? Why one at a time?
He had developed so much chemical sensitivity and had so many toxins in his body that anytime that we would put any kind of nutrition in his body, he would have a response to that.
They were natural supplements, right?
Natural
No
supplements
drugs.
like vitamin B12, folate, vitamin D.
Great.
Just natural things that are going to allow his body to heal. But he was a case that it took longer than average, but look at his results now, and he's feeling amazing, and he's able to do a full protocol. He has been able to reintroduce foods back into his diet now that we have done his gut repair. You know, foods that he previously couldn't eat, now he can eat them, and he doesn't have a problem anymore.
That is so awesome.
So it's really, really amazing. And if we look here,
great. So let's have a look at that. So here I see a big difference, and so here's my layman's look at this. So clearly they've got the red is when it's either too low or too high. So just remember, when you're looking at something here, you're not looking for everything to be out. It's not like you're looking at a scorecard when you're in grade school and you're looking for everything to be up in the high range. You don't actually want that. What you want to do is you want to have everything in the normal range. And if it goes in the normal range in this particular graph, they've just illustrated that by this blue outlining and the gray. That's what illustrates something being normal. So his GABA was actually right. It was on the lower end of normal.
it was on the low end of normal.
Yeah, but it was within a range that wouldn't necessarily, in my layman's perspective, be the most symptomatic thing. These are where he's going to be feeling symptoms, and even in these high ones, because as you described to me, Dr. Elena, that these two that are high, he's still going to be feeling the effects of these because they're in excess. And they need to be regulated.
Oh, absolutely. Like this just makes it really easy for you here.
Yeah.
If this brain chemical is too high or too low, it also contributes to anxiousness. It's not always just a serotonin issue.
Yeah.
If your epinephrine levels go up, you go into fight or flight.
Yeah.
And again, you're going to have anxiousness as well, and sleep difficulties. He had many neurotransmitters here all contributing. They were all like piling up on each other, just contributing to the way that he was feeling.
Got it. No, thank you. And so it's like, I think Goldilocks, right? It was just the right amount that it was too hot, too cold, chair was too big or too small, whatever it was, but like it needed to be just right, and there's that number. And our bodies are designed, so thankfully you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand all of this. Your body will naturally put everything in its right category, correct?
Everything.
If it doesn't have things that are impeding that or deficiencies.
No, exactly. Everything in the body needs to be in balance, whether it's your blood pressure or your blood sugar or the levels of oxygen in your body or your brain chemistry. Everything needs to be inside of a certain balance, even hormones, right? You don't want them too high and you don't want them too low, and brain chemistry is no exception. You don't want them too high, but you don't want them too low either.
Amazing. And so how would he describe his symptoms now? Like you briefly mentioned, but like...
I was on the phone with him the other day, and he told me that he said, I haven't felt this good in a long, long time, and when I do have a little bit of anxiety, it's a fraction of what it was. Like I'm handling it like a normal person would handle it. He's feeling much, much, much better. Awesome. Yeah, he's feeling amazing. He really was very, very committed to the process, and he saw the end result with, again, removing the interferences and changing his lifestyle and his foods and understanding how to use food as medicine and what supplements to take, in what dose, for what, and for how long that we need to do it. And we were able to see huge changes.
For the people, as you're watching this, looking at tests that you can do is an excellent thing. They're available, and we're recommending certain ones that are really cost effective, and they're great. Another great way that can work in tandem or in substitute, and there's a really cool fact. If you want to know what problem you may have and you don't have any money to spend on testing, this is the solution for you. And so Dr. Murphy has developed a test that can help you self-diagnose.
Yeah.
And you know, use that word how you will. We're not really making any claims here, but what I'm saying here is that you can use this to try to work out where the problem might lie in terms of with your neurotransmitters.
And this questionnaire is designed to help you to isolate what particular neurotransmitters you're deficient in, and then just as importantly, what amino acids to take to be able to correct these neurotransmitter or brain deficiencies. So if you look at the first one here, it's S, and that stands for serotonin. Now serotonin is the happy hormone. You know, the higher your serotonin level, the higher your pain threshold, the higher your serotonin, the less anxious you are, happier you are. It allows you to have mental clarity. You have more serotonin receptors in your intestinal tract than you do in your brain, so it helps with IBS. But serotonin is super, super important. And serotonin is, as I mentioned, the happy hormone. And so if you check 3 or more of these statements here, that if they apply to you, then it's probably a good sign that you're low in serotonin, and that you're going to benefit by supplementing some of the supplements I'm going to mention here in just a minute. So if you're low in serotonin, it's hard to go to sleep. You may find it's hard to stay asleep. You often find yourself irritable. Your emotions lack rationality. You occasionally experience unexpected tears. You feel depressed a lot of the time. Noise oftentimes is more problematic. You're more sensitive to it than you've ever been before. You have flare-ups. You feel irritable, angry. Sometimes you just fly off the handle for no reason. And oftentimes you'll see that you prefer to be left alone. You kind of want to hibernate. And those with low serotonin oftentimes find that their pain is magnified. So they've got a lower pain threshold. Pain is starting to get aches and pains here and there. That's so true in the fibromyalgia community. They have pain kind of all over. But if any of those apply to you, 3 or more apply to you, then that's a sign that you are low in serotonin. And serotonin doesn't come from a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressant. It comes from an amino acid called tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid that you should get in your diet by eating protein. And that tryptophan turns into a 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is a supplement that you can buy over the counter anywhere in the world. This natural supplement, if you start taking 5-hydroxytryptophan, you can then create serotonin. Now, these amino acids that I'm going to mention here in just a moment, they need to be taken with a good optimal daily allowance multivitamin. What's optimal daily allowance mean? That it's got to be much stronger than the RDA, the recommended disease allowance. So with the optimal daily allowance, it means that you're going to need to take a multivitamin that has sometimes 100 times to 500 times more of the B vitamins than, say, the RDA. But you want to be taking a good multivitamin. The multivitamin with all the B vitamins, vitamin C and magnesium, and the amino acid is what creates these brain chemicals. In the case of serotonin, I recommend, especially if you have sleep issues, that you start with 5-HTP 30 minutes before bed on an empty stomach, and you increase each night till you get to 300 milligrams. And what you should see is that helps you get into a deeper, more restorative sleep. Now, you'll see here the next one is the O group, and O stands for opioids. Now, a lot of people will try to self-medicate themselves, increase the opioid production by exercise. Opioids are stimulating your natural pain chemicals, enkephalins, endorphins by exercise. So I'm a runner, like to exercise, and one of the joys I get from that is I get this opioid boost without having to take opioids. And you can do the same thing. If you find that any of these statements, 3 or more of these statements apply to you, then I'm going to recommend you do some of the supplementation here I'm going to share with you in just a second. But you'll see that in opioids, you'll find that oftentimes that life seems incomplete. You feel shy with all but your closest friends. You have feelings of insecurity. You often feel unequal to others. You have a low self-esteem. When things go right, you feel undeserving. You occasionally feel that life has kind of passed you by. And you frequently feel kind of fearful, just kind of anxious, just kind of stressed out, and you don't know why. Oftentimes people that are low in opioids will self-medicate. If it's not with exercise, maybe they'll self-medicate with sedatives or alcohol or marijuana or cocaine. If that speaks to you, then what you want to do to boost, to actually create opioids naturally, is take an over-the-counter supplement, an amino acid called D-L-phenylalanine. And typically you start with about 2,000 milligrams of D-L-phenylalanine. You need to take it on an empty stomach. I recommend you take it 30 minutes before you eat breakfast. But start with 2,000 milligrams. You could take 2,000 in the morning if you need to, if you don't notice that mental boost or that help that you want in your moods. Then you can add another 2,000 milligrams in the afternoon. Now, I wouldn't take it past 3 p.m. because it is stimulating. That's one of the nice things about D-L-phenylalanine. If you feel like you don't have a lot of energy, it will help you mentally and physically. The other benefit from DLPA that I use it a lot for my fibro patients is as a natural pain blocker. So it helps to block pain. So it's a really good treatment for that. And the great thing is it's all natural, which is great. And you can use L-glutamine to help you get more bang out of taking DLPA. So L-glutamine is another over-the-counter amino acid that you can get. You can combine it with the DLPA and it helps you to get more out of it. Now the next group is called the G group, or GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. Obviously easier to say GABA. Now GABA is very calming, very relaxing. If you have 3 or more of these and you're probably low in GABA, you often feel anxious for no reason. You sometimes feel free-floating anxiety. You feel edgy or stressed out a lot of times. You feel like you just can't get your emotions under control. Oftentimes you can't fall asleep, you can't stay asleep. You find that you can't just turn your mind off even though you want to do so. If that's the case, then GABA is probably deficient in your brain, and you can benefit yourself by taking the over-the-counter gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which you can get at any health food store. It's very calming, very relaxing. It won't make you feel dopey, sleepy, or hungover, none of those kind of things. And it works really quickly. It works within about 15 or 20 minutes when you take it. Now you need to take it on an empty stomach, and I recommend you start with 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams. Typically that's plenty, and you can do it 2 or 3 times a day on an empty stomach to really calm things down. Now, some of you will take gamma-aminobutyric acid and you won't notice a benefit because for some people they can't absorb it. And if that's the case, don't get discouraged. Then I would recommend that you use another amino acid called L-theanine. L-theanine raises alpha brainwaves, which are the same brainwaves that are raised when you meditate. So L-theanine is very calming. And with L-theanine, you take 100 to 200 milligrams 2 to 3 times a day on an empty stomach. Again, it won't make you feel dopey, tired, or sleepy, but you can take that L-theanine and it's very calming. You can take these amino acids if you're using prescription medications, preferably if you're working with your doctor who's trained in functional medicine or orthomolecular medicine like I am. But my patients typically are on antidepressants, and until I get them feeling better, by using amino acid therapy and high doses of vitamins and minerals, amino acids, essential fatty acids, I allow them to combine the two. Then eventually, once their moods pick up, their anxiety goes down, they can slowly, with my help or with their doctor's help, slowly wean off their antidepressants. Now, if we look at the next category, it's the D group, and that stands for dopamine. Now, dopamine is a real powerful pain blocker, but it's also an antidepressant. And with dopamine, you find that oftentimes when you're low in dopamine, life seems to be less colorful, less pleasurable. You just don't really have a lot of pleasure in your life anymore. You feel like there's no rewards in life. You have an unexplained lack of concern, maybe for family members or others in the past that maybe you did. Maybe you've lost some of your spirituality. You feel this disconnect with the world and with those around you. You often find that you become very, you feel very bland, So that's a sign that you're low in dopamine. And now you can boost your dopamine level. You don't have to take Wellbutrin, which is an antidepressant. It's a stimulant that can cause all sorts of potential side effects. You don't have to take Cymbalta or Effexor to boost dopamine levels. You can do it by taking L-phenylalanine, which is an amino acid that you should be getting in your diet but may not be getting enough, or you just can't absorb it correctly, or you're not getting the amounts that you need, in particular for your situation. And I recommend with the L-phenylalanine, again, you can get this over the stomach. You start with 1,000 milligrams. You do that. You take it once or twice a day on an empty stomach, and you can increase that each day up till 2,000, 3,000, as much as 4,000 milligrams of L-phenylalanine taken on an empty stomach, and you should see within a few days that mentally you feel sharper, you feel better mood-wise. Now, it is stimulating because it's making dopamine, and that's a stimulating neurotransmitter brain chemical, so don't take it late in the day. It can interfere with your sleep. You can boost the effect of L-phenylalanine by combining L-glutamine, and you take 500 to 1,000 milligrams of L-glutamine along with the L-phenylalanine to make it work to be more impactful. Now, some of you will see that you try L-phenylalanine and it's not giving you the punch that you need, not helping. If that's the case, then I recommend you use another amino acid called S-adenosine, which is a potent antidepressant. For my fibro patients, it's a potent pain blocker. It helps with mental and physical energy, and that's called SAMe, S-adenosine. And with SAMe, you typically start with 200 milligrams on an empty stomach first thing in the morning before breakfast, and each day you increase by 200 milligrams until you notice that when you take a particular dose, whether that's 200 or all the way up to 1,200 milligrams, that when you take it within 30 minutes, you have more mental clarity, more energy, mentally and physically. And as I said, it's also a really good pain blocker. The next group is the N group, which this is another stimulating amino acid or neurotransmitter, called norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is made in your adrenal glands, your stress-coping glands, but it's also made in the brain. And when you get deficient in norepinephrine, you're going to start to see signs of low energy. You get up and go, got up and went. You find that you have a decreased drive. You find you might start things and don't finish them. You tend to want to hibernate. You feel depressed a great deal of the time. And you oftentimes will feel like you're threatened for no reason. You just feel like a little bit paranoid and, again, being disconnected. Now, the neurotransmitter norepinephrine comes from L-phenylalanine, as I mentioned earlier. So by using L-phenylalanine, you'll see that you can make norepinephrine. And again, I recommend you start with 1,000 milligrams twice a day on an empty stomach, and then you can increase up to 2,000 milligrams twice a day. You have to play around with the doses. And then again, if you need to, you can add L-glutamine to see if that helps the L-phenylalanine. If you don't notice a difference in L-phenylalanine, then switch to S-adenosine. The reason why I have people maybe start with L-theanine is because SAMe can be kind of pricey. And you start taking the higher doses, it can add up cost-wise. So you can start off with L-phenylalanine and see how you do. The exception to that is for my fibro patients. I find that typically the SAMe is a better pain blocker, and so I recommend that most people with fibro, they go ahead and just right away start with the SAMe. So that's the brain function questionnaire. As I mentioned earlier, no one has an antidepressant deficiency. You may have a deficiency of L-phenylalanine, deficiency of 5-HTP, a deficiency of gamma-aminobutyric acid, a deficient of S-adenosine or glutamine. You may have those deficiencies that then translate into mood disorders or translate into poor sleep or some of the other issues we see. But no one has a drug deficiency. So rather than using a drug that doesn't make these neurotransmitters, rather than using like a gasoline additive, why not use gasoline to fill up your tank? And you can take these all-natural supplements without all the potential side effects that you may have by taking antidepressants or taking anti-anxiety medications. I find that this is a great tool.
I don't test people for neurotransmitter deficiency like I used to some 15 years ago, because I find this tool that I've developed is usually just spot on. And this is something that you can do right away and make some headway in your quest to feel good again without getting a lot of testing. So I encourage you to play around with this and see if you can make some headway. And then if you can't, reach out to a doctor who's trained in orthomolecular medicine or trained in functional medicine that can help you to get the right combination that's going to be the best fit for you.
Neither of us are advocating that anybody would stop their medications. When I'm working with my fibromyalgia patients, typically they're on half a dozen to a dozen drugs when they start with me, and I would never take them off their medications. My goal is start to treat the underlying causes of their symptoms: poor sleep, low energy, pain, IBS, restless leg syndrome. And as I get them on the right doses, high doses, but the right and safe doses, but the right combinations of vitamins, minerals, amino acids that start to repair the biochemistry, and they start to feel better, they start to have more stress coping chemicals to be able to deal with life. Then and only then, when I start to wean them off, potentially what I call life-draining medications that are really not working. And typically when I'm working with my patients, I see that 99% of the time they can come off all their medications by correcting the underlying issues with high doses of the vitamins or minerals, but it takes time. Some people, though, what we see is that they need to be on antidepressants. That's just the way it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's where you're at, that's where you're at. Other people see that they can come off the antidepressants and they never miss them. Some people will try to come off of them and they have all these withdrawal symptoms. And so they think, oh, I need to stay on my Celexa or my Lexapro or my Cymbalta. But a lot of times what's happening is they're trying to come off of them too fast, and they're triggering withdrawal symptoms that create and mirror anxiety and depression, these other things. But if they work with the right physician, they absolutely can wean off those. But what we see is the longer you're on antidepressants, the more likely you are to get this thing called downregulation, which eventually, if you go to Walmart here in the States, there's thousands of parking places, so you can pull in, you can get a place to park. But let's say every month there's less and less parking places, but there's still the need, because we still have the same number of people coming to Walmart every day. But eventually you see that 40 and then 60% of those parking places are taken away. Now what happens is there's nowhere to park your car. What do you do? So what do you do? Same thing with the antidepressants is eventually when you don't have those receptor sites, they just quit working. And so at that point, whether that's 12 months, 18 months, 3 years, at some point, patients will complain to their doctor, and he or she then will probably switch them to another medication. But if you're not careful, you can create such a downregulation, such a deficiency, that you can never get those back. And in the process, as you said, Jonathan, being on these medications can create side effects, whether that's changing in the gut biome, they can affect your thyroid, they can affect your sleep, they deplete your natural sleep hormone melatonin, that eventually what you see is you're getting worse and worse and worse, not better. And that's common, unfortunately.
Today, I am happy to get up in the morning. I look forward to the future. I see God in so many new places, and there's just so much to experience. There's so much life to live. I'm just happy about life. I'm happy to meet other people. It's just a whole new outlook. I don't even recognize that person anymore that I talked about.
What does that feel like, Christy?
It's freedom. I praise God. It's just such a rejoicing sense of happiness and joy, and just to be able to talk to others about this experience, to help them in any way, to see that there is hope out there. There is a solution, that other people don't have to stay in that pit. That pit is not even real. It's just, I don't know. It's just, there's so much hope in life out there.
Several weeks later, her depression score had gone from 27 down to 1, which means that she didn't even have minor depression. So she left with no depression, she left with no anxiety, and she has continued to have no depression and no anxiety now for the last year and a half. So all of her previous diagnoses are no longer present. You know, she doesn't have ADHD anymore. Her premenstrual dysphoria is gone. Her treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, social phobias that she also had, and her addictions, they're all a thing of the past. And Christy is a completely new woman, and she's doing such a great good for society and her patients, and really everyone around her. She's just now become a transformative agent for others to obtain good health of mind as well.
As we began this series tonight, our goal is to show you that there is hope for lasting change if you or a loved one is wrestling with anxiety, depression, or other mental illnesses. There's hope for you if you're struggling with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's. You've heard some amazing stories from people who have experienced the transformation firsthand. We've discussed how important it is to have healthy thinking and congruent thoughts and beliefs. You are also able to see that the healthcare industry may not really have your best interests at heart. But if that's true, what else can be done? As we continue through the rest of this series, you'll have the opportunity to gain insights on what you can do practically to improve your mental health and find peace and joy, even while living in a chaotic world. Be sure to come back tomorrow and find out more detailed protocols that can help you change your life. I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm looking forward to the changes that you'll experience in your life when you use these life-saving protocols. I'm looking forward to seeing the world transform, healing happening, and the needless deaths, the needless suffering that's happening due to mental disease. That's why I'm here. That's why my wife and I are working together to help bring you these amazing solutions. They work, and they will work for you. Thank you for taking the time, giving me the honor and privilege of sharing with you. It's truly a labor of love. This is something that I felt compelled to do, and I know that it's going to change hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people's lives. So thank you. Tune in again. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.